Thanks, everyone. We're about to start. I'm hoping that there might be other people wanting to sit down, but we're going to keep going anyway. All right, even closer. Okay, so maybe if I say it again then, that we're about to start, and if you're interested, please do have a seat. I'd really like more people in the audience. All right, so I'm Åsa Ekdahl. I'm Head of Environment and Climate Change at World Steel, and we are one of the partners to this Standards Pavilion. And in fact, this is our first event. We're having more events later today and tomorrow. So you can come and speak to us if you want to hear more. So today we're going to talk about steel decarbonization. I'm going to have a fireside chat here with my two colleagues, but before we start, I wanted to give you a little bit background. Can we change the slides? Yeah. All right, so the World Steel Association, for those of you who don't know us, we're the global steel industry trade association. Our members are steel producing companies, national regional associations and research institutes. So we cover about 85% of the steel that is produced globally. We have recently produced a policy paper on climate change. You can find the QR code there, and there are some copies on the seats here for you as well. And so why is this an important topic? The steel industry today is, according to our estimations, responsible for about 7 to 8 of global anthropogenic GHG emissions. And while this is, of course, an enormous amount, we're also absolutely crucial as a material in the transition itself, providing low-carbon energy solutions and infrastructure, etc. But it is a big amount of greenhouse gases, and we need to work hard to reduce that. So the way we see it is what's illustrated on this slide. They have three main levers to get from where we are today to deep decarbonization. And the first one is to use more efficiency. We still believe that there is maybe 10 to 15% emissions that can be reduced with efficiency measures and existing technologies. The second one is to increase the use of scrap. And while we're using all the scrap that is available today, more will become available over the coming decades due to the growth in steel demand over the last few decades. And the third one is, of course, the one that will take us to where we need to be in the end, and that's breakthrough technologies. And as a steel industry, we have a number of options there, including hydrogen, using hydrogen for reduction, but also things like carbon capture and storage, and perhaps further in the future, direct electrolysis of iron ore. So this is also the biggest uncertainty in our predictions, and that's why it's kind of shaded there at the bottom, because it depends a lot on the supporting infrastructure and the available resources and low carbon energy, for example, and the price and availability of hydrogen. It's also going to vary a lot in different parts of the world, or rather the trajectory and the pathway will look different depending on local circumstances. So if we change to the next slide, please. I'm really pleased to be here with two of our members and dear colleagues. So let me introduce to you Senira Nunes. She's the General Manager Environment at Gerdau, and Guilherme Abreu, who is the General Manager Sustainability at ArcelorMittal Brazil. So I'm going to sit down, and then we're going to have a chat about what we think the future will bring. All right, so Senira, since you have the microphone, let's start with you. Could you tell us just very shortly about Gerdau and also what your focus in terms of climate action is right now?
So good afternoon, actually. It's a pleasure to be here. Gerdau is the largest Brazilian steel company. We are around Americas. We are the largest recycler in Latin America too. We recycle more or less 10 million tons of scrap per year. And 70% of our production comes from the scrap. But of course, we depend on iron ore, and that's what we produce with iron ore and charcoal, something different, and coal in Brazil. And it's a pleasure to be here to explain a little bit about our main concerns about decarbonization, especially in Brazil. So nowadays, our main focus in short terms is trying to find some different scraps. So we are starting to use these big platforms, petrol platforms, to use this scrap. It's something unique. For example, it's something that we are doing like right now. So like Osa explained, scrap is very important. And scrap is not so available in Brazil as in US or Europe because we don't our steel consumption is not so big, so high as the other countries. And we have a lot of biomass and renewables in Brazil. So biomass, the use of biomass opportunities to replace part of the coal and to replace using biomass or using more electrical renewable energy, produce more in Brazil. It's our main targets in the short term. Maybe in the next question I can talk about the long term, if you don't mind.
Yeah, we'll get back to the long term. But let me ask Guilherme to solve the same question to you. So what are you doing in Brazil? And maybe actually ArcelorMittal is a global company. If you want to put your activities in Brazil in context with what you do in the rest of the world, perhaps.
Good afternoon, everybody. ArcelorMittal is a global company. We have operations in Brazil. Currently, we have 42% of Brazilian production. Okay, but we have operations in Europe, North America, India, Mexico, all around the world. Basically, the decarbonization issue, I would say that what happens in Brazil is kind of what is happening in Europe with some delay in terms of time. Because the strategies that we have for our company in Brazil are very linked with the strategy that ArcelorMittal has worldwide. Of course, when we compare the assets we have in the country, like electricity, renewable, 90%, 90% of the electricity in Brazil is renewable. Also, the space we have in the country, the tendency for having wind and solar power generation, and also the issue of biomass, which is something unique in the country. I can say that what the experience we have with biomass in Brazil is something that our group is using to work together in the other solutions everywhere. But the same way that they are facing in Europe with the economic return of the initiatives, we are facing in Brazil also. So we are in a very big moment, which I think the name of this panel of the crystal ball is very appropriated, because we have really to guess what's going to happen in the future. What I see is in our strategy in ArcelorMittal is to maximize and increase those technologies that are already known, like the use of scrap, the use of natural gas, the use of biomass, the energy efficiency, and so on. That's the first step, and we think that this could be in place in a medium term in terms of time. And in the long term, of course, we have the hydrogen in the table, we have the CCU, CCS in the table, and the hydrogen also, because of the conditions that the country has in terms of solar, wind, and electric generation. It's a very, very promising place to have this hydrogen with a more attractive cost that could change the projects in terms of its economical results, economical possibilities.
Let me follow up on the enabling conditions, because there's a lot of talk today about that there is not enough demand for the low carbon or near zero steel and other products. How does that look like in Brazil? Do your customers ask for these products, or what's the feeling around that?
Yes, they ask, but at the same time, they ask for a discount, these products. The question is, I think the question is founded on the premium price. The premium price for decarbonization is the question. Yesterday, I was in a panel of the Finland people, and there was a guy from India, a person from India, talking about the premium price and so on. And so he gave a good number that I had this figure, but not so specific, that an increase of $200, around $200 per ton of steel in terms of decarbonization technologies would affect the final product to 2 to 5%, which is for a car, for instance, in automobilistic market, which means that the premium price for the final consumer is not the same impact as we have in our operations. If you talk $200 per ton of steel increase in your operations, you are going to completely finalize your operations, and bye-bye, there is no more operation, which is impossible to accept. But when you put in the supply chain, there is a possibility to that. So what I think is that in the future, the very long future, the idea is that this premium price must be zero, should be zero, because you have to produce the steel with the same operational cost, with the new technologies, with the same operational costs we have today. But we know that until achieved there is a long road, okay, in terms of understanding of the technology, incorporating the CapEx, incorporating the OpEx, learn how to work with the new technologies, create new jobs, create new skills for the people that are going to work. And after that, 25, 30 years from here, much probably the premium price could be lower and lower and lower. And so the new technology will come in place in that. So, and just finalize, there is a movement, okay? Even in Europe, there is a movement in terms of the premium price. But it's not so tough to guarantee possible operations and implementation of the new technologies, the disruptive technologies.
Well, someone could argue that introducing a carbon price would make the traditional production more expensive, and therefore you would reach the same cost. Even if it's higher, you would at least achieve a kind of a level playing field, or ideally a promotion, of course, of the low carbon technology. I know that there is a carbon system being introduced in Brazil. I don't know, Sunita, if you want to say something about that. How do you feel about that? Do you think it's going to make a difference?
Yeah, of course. It's a challenge, this carbon market in Brazil, because it's very different if we compare, for example, from ETS in Europe or even in Canada, because, of course, Brazil has different kinds of CO2 emissions. That's not the big impact comparing to this country. So most of our CO2 emissions in Brazil comes from the agricultural, the forest, etc. But of course, the industry is very important for this process, for this carbon market, and the possibility to develop public politics that enhance our decarbonization pathway, it's very important. So I'm with some colleagues from the steel industry in Brazil, and what we are trying to build together with the governance and the NGOs, etc. It's a carbon market that makes the right place for the renewables, the biomass, and the incentives that makes us not to be not updated in technology. For example, in Brazil, for the industry, it's cheaper to help the forests to be, like they say, to keep the forests, so we can pay, the industry can pay for this forest, and to avoid this deforestation, it will be cheaper than update the technology. But if you do that, in 30 years, 40 years, we are not in the same level as the other industry. So what is the best for the country, for this industry? And nowadays, we are facing a real challenge because we are importing like country, steel from China, amounts that we never seen before. And it's hard to think in a long term when we don't have the guarantee in the short term that we can keep running our steel mills, because we are very impacted for this steel importation from China. And because of that, we are trying to develop this kind of public policies to help in this carbon market. One is very important, connecting the customer question. We have a public policy, the name is Move. And we need to, like a country, need to develop a life cycle assessment for electrical cars. And depending on the level of the GWP emissions, we will reduce the tariffs for these cars. So it's an opportunity. It's something, in my opinion, very interesting, because we are incentiving all the, not just the steel companies, but the automotive companies, all the chain of custody to help in this decarbonization with a lot of incentives, a different one. Not to paying to change subsidize the change of the technology, but how all this chain of custody could help in this decarbonization for the electrical cars, for example.
Regarding the carbon market, which I think is a very interesting issue in Brazil. Recently, we have the law approved by the federal government and so on. Expectations are that in 5 years, until 2030, something like this system will be really in force after all the development phase and so on. But I would like to highlight some points that I don't like to say that carbon market is good, but I think it's the less evil for the company, for the companies that emit CO2 and so on. But anyway, there are some difference in this carbon market if they could put in place, if we could put in place, it would be very good. First one is that we, different from Europe, we have a very, very big voluntary market of carbon in Brazil. Okay, there is a very big because of the issue Senira has talked to us. The level of forests that we have here, the nature-based solutions, lots of things in Brazil. The country is very big and so on. It's like biomass is something that is very, very particular from Brazil. And this voluntary market has a connection with the market that is regulated that we are going to be part of. Okay, there are many of discussions. Some people doesn't agree, some technical people doesn't agree, others agree. I agree, because I think that the amount of credits that are going to be generated on this market will help to buffer the prices of carbon credits in the other one. And so we are not going to have like a crystal ball, we are talking like in a crystal ball event, we are going to have in the future some price of carbon that is not going to be the same of Europe, but it's going to be regulated by the voluntary one. This is the first issue, which I think is very important to be understand and to be developed. And the second issue is that there is an establishment of the law. A phrase very important is that carbon market doesn't have to compromise the competitiveness of the companies in Brazil. And it's linked with the external, I would say the imported steel in Brazil, which is a situation we are having today very crazy. If you have anything that commit more than we are already committed in terms of taxes, in terms of costs and so on, so it's going to be a very bad situation, and can make a corrosion in the steel company in Brazil. So that's the point. And the last issue is that at the same time when we talk about carbon market, you ask for a mechanism to avoid other products coming to Brazil with a higher footprint of CO2, which I think that as a provision, you can annotate that, that in a few years, much probably in Brazil, we're going to have something like CBAM in order to avoid this kind at the same time the market's going to be implemented in Brazil, which is kind of an equilibrium of the sector, which is, I see with good eyes this kind of issue.
Yeah, it's a complicated topic. I mean, I don't really want to talk about CBAM because I know how difficult and controversial it is. But I mean, we can observe from the outside that CBAM have sort of triggered other countries to speed up the implementation of these measures. And there are also discussions, I think, also here at COP, initiated by Brazil, for countries who are willing to kind of work together to not necessarily harmonize their market, but kind of have more collaboration between the markets. Ideas, you know, as we know, for example, of reducing tariffs if you're part of the same type of system and stuff. But I wanted to come back to the demand side, and we are in the standards pavilion after all, and we know that standards are very important to the steel industry and to world steel. It's one of the topics that are on the top of our agenda together with all of our members. But linking it sort of to the demand aspect, because how important would you see that it is to have a definition of what we mean with low carbon steel or indeed near zero steel? And would it be necessary to have it globally? Or maybe it's okay that there is one in, you know, different ones in different markets. So basically looking at the definitions and saying we don't have to go into the detail on what they should be, but more about how important is it that we harmonize and what roles do they play? Because it's linked to the whole demand question, but it's also linked to, for example, trade and tariffs and other things. Do you want to go?
Sometimes I used to say that when I started to work with this 40 years ago, the specific consumption of steel in Brazil was 100 kilos per habitants per year. And China's was 40.
What is it now in Brazil?
That's the question.
500. Oh, it's still 100.
That's the question. This is my catch. Take it easy. Nowadays, China is 450, something like this. I think Brazil is the same.
South Korea is 900.
But no,
for
South
example.
Korea is outlier. Okay. But Brazil is the same. So in the last 40 years, we are in the same level of consumption of steel. There are some leaderships in Brazil from the steel sector. They said, I do anything regarding decarbonization if we increase the consumption in Brazil, specific consumption, which I think is the main point to be pursued by the sector and by industry in Brazil. If we increase the consumption with the same price, I can risk it to say, without premium price, it will help to retrofeed all the supply chain, and so we can implement technologies very small, with premium price or not, I don't know. But more important than the premium price is to increase the consumption, but not to increase the consumption with the imported steel, with the steel produced in Brazil. That's the point. And this is the point. And what is the value of the premium price? That's the second point, very important. What's the value? What's the fair value of the premium price? Is the value that I spend more in the decarbonization through the whole supply chain. And that's the point, because sometimes you say, yes, the value to increase, to reduce is $50. Okay, I will ask for 60 because I want to have a, and that's the point that doesn't work. This is something very, very bad for the sector as a whole. So I think that the incentive, one of the directives priorities, the incentive for low carbon, low CO2 steel in Brazil. It's not green steel, I don't like this issue. Low CO2 steel in Brazil, the incentives for this are one of the most important things to do to increase the consumption of the country. We are going to increase the development because it's associated. We are going to retrofit the supply chain. We are going to achieve our targets more easily, I think.
I'm trying to focus on the other part of your question about the methodology. What we're facing right now, when we're talking about our CO2 emissions, our GHG emissions, internally speaking, we have problems. Because if you're talking about LCA, it's a figure. If you're talking about inventories, it's another number. If we are talking about the International Energy Agency, it's another methodology. World Steel, another one. So it's hard to explain internally. Imagine for our customers. So sometimes our customer says, give me a green steel. I don't like this green steel. So low carbon steel. We have some thoughts about that. Scrap-based, renewable, we can call something low carbon steel. But how can we measure this in a way that everybody can understand? And what I'm very concerned about this topic, is that we are facing a lot of initiatives talking about these levels, talking about the methodology, with sometimes with not so many knowledge about that. And what I always explain to my customers, that we are giving them the information as trying to bring a lot of transparency, auditing our figures, using the most recognized initiatives like World Steel, like GAG, Protocol, etc., LCAs. But it's hard. I think that we should at least have more efforts, like steel industry and other institutions, to have these interoperability ways to measure CO2. That's why I really appreciate the World Trade Organization and World Steel initiative that lead us to better information for these CO2 emissions. Because at least if we have some guideline, international guideline, just one, would be easy to explain for customers, internally, for everybody. And of course, this premium price will be another level. We are in a basic one. We don't know how to measure in the same way for all the steel industry. So how can we talk about premium price if we don't measure the same way for all over the countries, all over the world? So
I think we're going to have to take questions after. I hope you can stay. We just have really 1 minute left, and I just wanted to ask you, maybe if you can list 3 things each, very short, that you see as critical enablers for us to, or for you guys, to move faster and further and faster. That's the, what would be needed? 3 things.
Financial, raw materials, good quality of iron ore, and availability of natural gas, price for natural gas, and then hydrogen in the future, and people with knowledge about how can we find these enablers, how can we have people with culture, decarbonization culture in our engineering areas, operational areas, these 3 things: money, people, and raw materials.
I just would add I fully agree with the 3-1, and I just add the issue of increasing of the consumption of steel in Brazil. This is very particular and has to be addressed with public policies, government policy for the private sector, and so on, because this is the key for, I would say, improving the sector in Brazil, improving the issue and permit the decarbonization technology.
All right. So thanks a lot for these, this conversation and these comments. It's always too short, right? I'm sure we could talk about this for quite a lot longer. So please, if you have the time, hang around if there are questions. Let me just say we're finishing now, but we're having a very exciting another fireside chat in just 15 minutes, and it's going to touch on the standards in the steel industry. Later today, we have a workshop on low-carbon products and chain of custody. And tomorrow we have another panel related to standards as well and the steel standards principle. So if you're interested in these topics, please do check out the schedule and hang around. So thanks everyone.
Yeah, of course.